Hello, everyone, all the listeners, fans, what have you. I am your host for this episode, Cody Stoffer, and today we got another set of lightning previews for you here. We're going to keep it on the 4A level for this episode here, where we're going to talk about how teams did last year, kind of what our predictions looked like for them last year, and how that compares. In addition to that, take a look at who is graduating from these squads from last season, who's returning, and how that looks to impact their season coming up here in the fall. And without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. First up, we have one of the most interesting programs as far as how they have fared during the PMC era here in Broomfield here. And let's go ahead and talk about the Eagles and kind of what their season looked like last year. They came in attempting to defend their title, remember, from that 22 season. And with our expectations at 8-2, they hit that mark on the head, blowing out Longmont at the start of the season. But then the season would look drastically different, losing to eventual 3A state champs Holy Family in a 1-point game that would be a part of their kind of bumpy 2-2 start to the season, with a big loss on the road in Erie a couple weeks later. That would also be the beginning of an injury-riddled season for starting QB C.T. Worley. This Eagle squad was committed enough to shake that off and win out with wins over Dakota Ridge, Brighton, Aurora Central, Adams City, Fruita Monument, and then a big win over Heritage to win their league and get a bye. Following that bye here, they would easily defeat Fruita Monument in a rematch here, and then Mesa Ridge at home before losing to Palmer Ridge on the road to end their season in a cold, crunchy kind of way. So some of these seniors who won't be returning, some of the class of 24 guys who won't be returning to help amend that loss and try and make a deeper run are the likes of Caleb Meehan. He was only a carry away from the most on this team, but was effective on the ground regardless, going for 703 yards and was first in touchdowns amongst true running backs at 9 total. He also lose out on offensive weapon / X Factor Brent Harris. Very important X Factor for state game a couple years ago and that season in general, graduating after another 200-plus receiving and rushing yard season. Anthony Cobb was the leading receiver of this squad here in 24 with over 500 yards and 5 scores. And if you combine his total with Meehan and Harris, that's nearly 1,000 yards going across the stage here. Landon Davidson was a highly touted prospect on the offensive line, who's off to big things on the D1 level, but he will be graduating here. You also lose Noah Biller on the defensive side, who was worth 119 tackles in the season prior, while also recovering 3 fumbles and batting away a couple of passes. Brent Harris's versatility translated to defense as well, where he had 54 solo tackles and was second on the team in both interceptions and pass deflections with 3 and 11. Caleb Meehan was getting it done over on the defensive side of the ball as well, leading the squad with sacks, accounting for nearly half of the team's total sacks, as well as 10 total tackles for loss. And last but not least here to talk about, Joey Lipshaw was listed as having 7 TFLs, which was good for second best on this defensive unit last season here. And that may sound like a ton of production, and it really is, especially with these guys, some of these guys contributing to that state championship a couple years ago. So it's even less and less players here who were starting on that 2022 squad, but they do have at least one of those here in Mikhail Benner, led this team in interceptions during that state run and kind of opened up the door here for, this past season, Mason Smiley's rise, as people would not throw it to Benner's side anymore and kind of that cover 3 look, as he made a lot of teams pay and burn them. And then Smiley led this team in interceptions. And so they have 2 different interception leaders from 2 different years coming into their senior year here in the secondary. And that doesn't even mention having a very interesting prospect in the class of 26 in John Singleton, as yet another option for the squad, and Gio Toledo on the back end, cleaning up any threats that somehow got past that core. You also get Maverick Scarpella here, who found a few ways to make impacts for this defense, but namely was second on the entire team in tackles at 76, and now an incoming senior and truly one of the starters and hearts of that squad from a couple years ago, Ty LaCrue, played both ways this past season, playing a lot more defense last season than he did 2 seasons ago. But most importantly is still the senior center on this team who will guide this unit to another successful season, regardless of who's there with his intellect, communication, and leadership. Some of the guys helping him on the line will include the likes of Isaiah Garcia Perez, as well as Evan Haynes. Both of those are class of 26 contributors who will help keep a clean pocket and pave rushing lanes in their junior years. And then primarily in a blocking role, Caleb Dunn's massive frame and strength is sure to help as well. And he also saw some snaps rotationally on defense that are definitely intimidating to any of those opponents with his size and frame. Offensively, Gavin Montoya had a very solid freshman season with blazing speed and nice hands. He could be a nice addition and factor to replace some of the receiving talent that departed. And fortunately, out of the backfield, Joe Larson already led this squad in yards last season, rushing for 721 yards. And we got Torres and Les both as players who, with healthy seasons, could make this one of the most dangerous backfields in the state combined with that offensive line. The final question here is who's going to be lined up under center to start the season. Quarterback C.T. Worley suffered a terrifying injury last season amid an awesome season where he had over 1,500 total yards between the ground and the air for a total of 20 touchdowns, but his battering ram usage could not and should not be the same should he be able to line up and play under center with both the injury history and sustainability and player health that will be at play here. And should he not be able to play, Darian Jackson was good enough to man the ship last season, throwing 9 touchdowns to just 5 interceptions here. I don't know as far as being the dual threat that CT is, or maybe the pop on the ball, if it's the same caliber of quarterback, in my opinion. But it's still a quarterback that can take you pretty far in this season, in this realm and this version of 4A. So that's kind of my takes on Broomfield. I think that they're going to be really good coming back, honestly. And looking at their schedule, there's a ton of winnable games here. Their very first game is against Frederick here in Frederick. This is Frederick's first game that's going to be on the 4A level. And I think that Broomfield could welcome them in kind of a big and physical way here. And so I have them beating Frederick here, as well as beating Monarch, as well as Rocky Mountain, honestly. This is the first of 3 5A games in a row. Not sure if they're getting ready to go to 5A or if they are just going to, be a team that's trying to compete and help their RPI out a little bit by facing teams from other classifications. But regardless, I think that they start off 3-0. And then they have a tough game against a good Legacy squad. This is kind of another battle for Broomfield type beat. I think this is a winnable game, if I'm being completely honest, especially upon finding out that Legacy will be rolling out a sophomore quarterback here. That is a tall task against this secondary here. It's just a matter on if this offense can outscore whatever Legacy's offense is able to put up here. And I do kind of have faith in that. So I think that they can go 4-0 here. Now, their Week 5 game against Erie, they do have the benefit of this being at home. I'm assuming 9 News is going to be there. But this game could go either way. I currently have Erie favored in this, however. So we'll see if they can keep bouncing back and making this a tough game both years. But moving on to their league, they got Longmont, Adams City, Grand Junction Central, Riverdale Ridge, and Skyline. I think that their biggest competition in this league is going to be Longmont and Riverdale Ridge. They could probably get pushed by Grand Junction Central a little bit, but ultimately I think that they should win all these games. So, that gives Erie, I'm going to project them to go 9-1 with a window of wins anywhere from 7 to 10. Honestly, there is a chance for an undefeated season here, depending on how they play the likes of Erie and Legacy here. I don't think that these games should be super far away, but like I said, with a window of wins of 7-3, I do think that they could lose to Legacy, Erie, and maybe one of their league games should they be on the road and get caught by surprise here. So that's kind of my projection here. I'm going to project them to go 9-1, like I said, with a window of wins, once again, of 7 to 10. Now we're on to one of Broomfield's opponents who's now in 4A after being in 3A last season, and that is Riverdale Ridge. Riverdale blew expectations out of the water en route to an 8-2 season, completely dismantling my projected win total of 1-9 and WoW of 0-3. So what made this team so surprising and inspiring here? Well, that had a lot to do with this year's incoming senior class, but let's discuss some of the class of 24 players who made this team fly. One of those being tight end, who was in strong top 5 consideration. Marcus McFadden, who was the safety blanket of this squad, going for almost 10 receiving touchdowns and just being a huge mismatch downfield with his size and speed. Kind of reminded me of a little bit of a Delaney Walker here as far as just like the strength and just a little bit more of a size mismatch, at least here on the Colorado 3A level. Defensively, this team is kind of getting scraped across the top with the top 3 tacklers all graduating. Levi Jane, who led by a decent margin at 81 total. Rocco Bonallo here, who had 58 total, as well as 4.5 for loss. And Jacob Gerber, who was third with 56 total. You also lose Caden Trujillo, who was the leading interceptor, flipping possession 4 times and also recovering a fumble at one point. But outside of that, there's going to be a lot of returning playmakers here. Almost all major offensive contributors returned to the fold, starting with quarterback Isaiah Medina, who threw 19 scores and almost 2,000 yards, while running for another 8 scores, excelling in the red zone and tucking and running when the pass wasn't there. You also get back Diego Galvin, who is the leading ball carrier as only a sophomore, going for 615 yards and 4 scores, and will be joined by incoming senior Amari Lucero, who is a fullback for sure, who can catch defenses off guard at times. Galvin was also versatile here, being tied for second in receptions and third in yards catching the football as well. So just an offensive weapon here. You also get Jay Otanez, Bobby Jackson, and Jeter MacArthur, who will look to post even bigger numbers and will collectively fill that receiving void left by McFadden. You also get fresh back into eligibility a potential big target in Jack Hodge here. And you get Porter Yossi, who is a interior offensive lineman who will strap up for this squad, who made our watch list. You also bring back Samuel Vasquez Lopez, who made the watch list after ranking 4th on the team in total tackles at 44 and will be a force in his frame. Amari Lucero, who I mentioned at the fullback position, is a solid defensive presence as well after a junior season that saw him record 7 TFLs. Jack Talley is another giant on this defensive line who saw limited action as a sophomore and is sure to get more snaps his junior year. Another sophomore lineman who only played half the games was Adrian Salazar, but with his size has some serious upside. You also bring back Isaac Alvadrez here, second in INTs with 3. And on top of that, Logan Mestis and Guinto here, both come back to the defense, looking to increase their impact as well. And last but not least here, at least on my short little list, is watch list rusher Colton Lancaster, who recovered 3 fumbles and could be an all-PMC guy with a big season here. And now they have skyrocketed into the 4A level pretty fast here, but with a good blend of size and experience, they could still potentially be a playoff team here in 4A. So let's go ahead and crack open this schedule here. I love that their very first game is a game on the road against an out-of-state team in Freedom. This team, historically, Freedom that is, has kind of served as a warm-up punching bag of sorts, but at the same time, they are a 7A team here. So I think that is important to consider when looking at some of these Florida teams, is that they are competing against schools with really big enrollment numbers. And yeah, I just think that this school, they kind of ended the season on a high note with a couple of wins and could be a good test for Riverdale Ridge heading into this next season. Riverdale then plays a home game versus Pooter. That one could honestly go either way before facing Severance on the road and Thornton at home and Silver Creek on the road. Before discussing Silver Creek here and getting into the rest of their league play, there's a lot of question marks here heading into some of these games as to what they're returning. But I do think that at bare minimum, they go 3-2 over this stretch, and on the high end could go 5-0 for non-league play. like I said, should be a playoff team. Playing some of these teams should help build up their confidence as they do head into an interesting league here with their first game going against Skyline and then at home versus Longmont before facing off against Adams City at home and then alternating away and home with Broomfield and Grand Junction Central. Look, here in the league, you got to beat Adams City, you got to beat Skyline. If you can win those two games, that means that your season, you've at least gone 500, if not a couple games better, because I don't see the path to victory against the likes of a Longmont or a Broomfield. I think that those teams just really are going to be a little bit better here this season compared to last season in some ways. And Riverdale Ridge, I just don't think has the depth that these programs do, or even two-way impact players that are as good as some of the guys that will be suiting up for those programs this season. So, yeah, I think that at worst, this team goes 5-5, honestly, but at best could go like 7-3 if they steal some of those non-league games here or win some more of those. But as far as league goes, I think that Longmont and Broomfield are almost definitely losses, and then they lose a combination of either Grand Junction Central or Pooter and or potentially Severance if Severance figures out their offense early on and just keeps it simple. But ultimately, Riverdale Ridge should have a winning record and should make the postseason. Up next, we're going to talk about another ridge, this one on the Littleton side in Dakota Ridge here. This squad, this was an interesting team that felt like a little bit of a transition last year. As I said, they land anywhere between 5 to 7 wins, and they hit the ceiling on that, winning 7 games in the regular season with some big wins, like their bludgeoning of East River in Florida, their 32-point win over Bear Creek, and their blowouts of Grand Junction and Stanley Lake, but cut some other wins close, like an impressive win over Mesa Ridge in Week 3 down in the Springs, and a 1-point win over Golden later in the season, also on the road. And their losses were to other playoff teams, losing only to Pueblo West by a single score, Chatfield, which was a semifinal 5A team, and then to Broomfield on the road. This team would take care of business against Thomas Jefferson in an authoritative 52-28 win before their season ended to the eventual state champions in Erie 35-7. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the players who they lose to graduation this season. One of those being offensive weapon and UNCO commit Blake Palladino, who graduates after 2 years at Dakota Ridge that went pretty well, with him completing 60% of his passes this past season and throwing 17 touchdowns and running for another 13 as he easily eclipsed 2,500 yards as an offensive weapon. He also loses the top 3, or I should say the next QB, loses their top 3 receivers from last year in Alex Arnold, Jack Stewart, and Cole Ellinger, all being class of 24 and taking over 1,000 yards and 13 total scores with them. Brandon Cusick's graduation removes the heart of this defense from the past 2 seasons, as well as his running mate, Connor Swanson, who both had over 80 tackles and had 6 and 3 TFLs, respectively. Carson Sauter here was virtually impossible to get a pass on, breaking up 23 passes and intercepting 2 of them, being one of the most statistically successful pass coverage defenders last season. Walker Mensch and Cale Fowler were the specialists at pressuring the QB with 11 hurries apiece, and Mensch pacing all Eagles in sacks at 6. And if you throw in a Patron who had 8 hurries themselves, this Eagles pass rush will look very different next season, and so will the structure of their team as Coach Woj here does retire and hands off, or passes the torch, I should say, to a longtime offensive assistant who will look to keep things rolling here. And he has a decent chance to, because the returning talent on this offense is nothing short of special. You do get Landon Kalsbeck, who's the premier player now on this DR squad after leading in all-purpose yards, rushing for 986 and catching for almost 200 while scoring 15 total touchdowns on offense, bringing a physicality at the running back position that opponents had to respect. You also have Sam Callis here, who will be the second back in this system and hopefully shoulder some of the load after breaking 300 yards last season and finding pay dirt 5 times. But what's really impressive is this line, who's going to be big and returning a ton of experience. Paving lanes for these guys will be class of 26 studs Nick J and Jimmy Newman, who seem to pick up the offensive scheme pretty well as just sophomores. At the tackle positions, you got Zach Wolfinger and Jace Winchester, who will bring continuity on the offensive line that should help out the new staff and quarterback. On the interior of the defensive line, Marcus Weston did not load up on the stat box, but will be a force for that side of the ball under another offseason work and plenty of starters graduating. We will see how much wear and tear they throw onto Kalsbeck's plate, but he is more than competent at being an all-around back here, as he is a great all-around linebacker to be impactful on both sides of the ball. Defensively, Nolan Hartman will probably be the most productive linebacker returning to the fold following a 62 tackle season last year. And the younger Palladino, Brady, that is, will probably get his shot at linebacker or edge rusher with 7 seniors ahead of him graduating, and with his build continuing to come around to a full-out varsity level. The back end of this secondary can truly be special, as well as Jack Offerdahl here made a massive impact his sophomore season, flying around the field for 80 tackles and being third on the team in pass breakups with 12, and tying the team lead with Landon Kalsbeck, ironically enough, with 3 interceptions. Not to mention, they should have Blake Bishop coming up in the ranks, who is a great athlete in his own right at that safety position. They also welcome back Kobe Stewart, who went berserk for 12 pass breakups and a pick in just his sophomore season. So looking ahead to this season here, Dakota Ridge does start off the season against Chatfield. This might be one of the better chances that they've had to beat them since a few years ago, but I still have Chatfield favored in that game. Then they have Green Mountain here. I do think that Green Mountain is still going to be one of the better teams in 3A, but I still think this should probably be a win. And then probably one of the biggest 4A matchups in the entire state over the course of the entire regular season, arguably, might be this game against Mesa Ridge here. This Mesa Ridge team is, spoiler alert, at number 1 on my preseason power rankings. So this could be a chance to make a statement, especially at home, or this could be a chance to have a statement made on you. They then play Pomona after that, and then Cherokee Trail. Cherokee Trail is returning like an insane amount of talent on both sides of the ball. So I actually do have Cherokee Trail favored in that, but I think that they should beat Pomona. I think they should beat Green Mountain. Now, while they might go 2-3, there's a chance that they win that Cherokee Trail game here and that Mesa Ridge game. So really 2 to 4 window of wins in non-league play, but I'm projecting them to probably go 2-3 before heading into their league play. And their league is going to be pretty interesting this year, as they have at Pondo versus Heritage, at Highlands Ranch versus Golden, and versus Bear Creek. I think that they definitely beat Highlands Ranch and Bear Creek here. And then the likes of Pondo, Heritage, and Golden, I think they do win one of these games at bare minimum. I probably have them most favored against Golden here. Meanwhile, Pondo and Heritage are going to be tough tests. I don't know if they win those. And so, Dakota Ridge, they got a tough road ahead of them, I will say. I think that they should win at least 5 games and at least go 500. But without a clearly returning and established QB, that's something that just kind of throws me off just a little bit here. But if they have a quarterback who does develop by, about halfway through the season, they do have chances to win against Cherokee Trail, pull off an upset, and probably Ponderosa as well. So I'm going to say a window of wins, very original here, of 5-7. But I say that overall that they find a way to go 6-4 this season. But this is just a really, really tough schedule. I think that this season is going to look very different compared to years past, and the way that this offense works is going to look just pretty different. But I think that they are on pace to have a solid season. Up next, we got another Idge here, and that is Heritage, my former rivals here, and maybe return. But anyways, they had a window of wins last season of 7-9, in which they finished just under, but that's in part to a close loss to Fruita Monument that I did not think they were going to lose. But all in all, still had a successful season. After losing the first 2, as I thought they might, they then clobbered Pueblo Central, Overland, and then losing to Fruta at home by 3, which is where they would inflict some serious damage on their next few opponents with a combined total over Adams City and Aurora Central of 123-0. They would cool down, losing against Broomfield 28-19 for the league title. I then attended their first playoff game against Golden, which looks closer than it actually was, as they ran very, very well, winning 31-18, and then lost to Palmer Ridge in those quarterfinals. So some of the players that made that possible last season included the likes of Kurt KJ Rossner, who manned this offense in his one season as a starter and impressed, going for 1,800 yards and 19 passing scores, getting the ball to his playmakers and opening up the field for this rushing attack to succeed. He also played a role in that rushing attack, going for 444 yards as well as 5 scores here. He also gets ready to play on the next level, so that's how much of an impact guy he was. Luca Pasola here notched 70 carries for 292 yards and 2 scores himself, along with fellow senior Isaac Fring, who got 200 yards in this super backfield by committee approach here. And Pasola was also third on the team in yards and receptions. Nick Long was one of the premier defensive forces in 4A last season, notching 14 TFLs and 86 total tackles while constantly drawing attention from offenses, to which he responded with 10 sacks and 15 hurries in an awesome season. He also had Lucas Madrid, who rose to the occasion last season, being second on the team in 4 sacks and TFLs at 8 to go with his 62 tackles. The front 7 loses more with Graham and Schisler here, who take over 100 tackles across the stage with them and 11 TFLs, with Reed marking the lead at 7 here. Caleb Hartzell as well as Gabe Martinez make up more spots, with 7 of the top 8 seniors in tackles graduating and nearly 10 TFLs between them. Turner Graham and Gabe Martinez were also the only defenders with multiple interceptions, and of the senior class were half the interceptions, with the class of 24 in total having 8 of 12 total picks. Shout out to Rex Guthrie, who 2 seasons ago was a Defensive Playmaker of the Year candidate, but whose season was unfortunately cut short last season. But we wish him good health and success moving forward. Now, talking about some returning playmakers here, one of the most coveted Colorado prospects enters only his junior year with crazy offers to a top of D1s and a few Power 4 teams. Standing at 6'7" and 245 pounds, Cam Jensen here is somebody who notched 19 catches for 233 yards and 4 scores and should hopefully be more involved and more targeted in the offense in this upcoming season. Now, somebody who had a ton of targets and receptions was Tanner Turch, who was the real deal threat down the sideline here for a passing attack, recording 55 receptions for 876 yards and 8 scores. Jet Balika here was the lead back in this rushing attack, toting the ball 87 times for 529 yards and 10 scores, with an especially big performance in the postseason against Golden for a signature game and win. Now, while Rex's season was unfortunately cut short, his younger brother, who I'm assuming Tanner Guthrie here, is looking to make a name for himself after being second on the team in tackles and stepping up, and will be looked at probably as a leader on this defense, with this defense losing so much last season. And then Armory Teasley impressed when giving snaps. He has serious size and strength to provide a push to the middle of the field that I think is going to be desperately needed, and, just generate a little bit of motion for this Heritage squad. And last but not least here, this is somebody who we've kind of had tabs on here coming in at quarterback this season, is going to be potentially Jamison Cease, who with all these weapons should be able to find success. And so let's go ahead and take a look at this schedule for Heritage. They start off the season on the road at Severance. They should pick up a quick win there before facing Arapahoe at home. This is probably the best chance that Heritage has had to beat Arapahoe in the past few years, but I still have Arapahoe favored in that game. They then play Northfield. More on them later. They're kind of going through a decent amount of change. I think that this could be a good game, but I still have Heritage favored. Mesa Ridge, I'm just saying because this is on the road, this is probably a loss. And then they have a home game against Columbine to wrap up their non-league play. That's probably also a loss here. So probably 2-3 heading into league, but I think that that's going to make them very strong and very sharp here. Heading into league, I think that, this Golden team, they could play spoiler, but they have the benefit of playing at home before playing Dakota Ridge and Bear Creek back-to-back weeks on the road. They could at worst go 1-1 in those games, but I think that they could still go 2-0 before facing Highlands Ranch and Ponderosa here. That Pondo game is going to be very, very important for seeding and have heavy playoff implications here at the end of the season. But just looking through this schedule here, I think that you could win, a potential game against Mesa Ridge that could go either way. Golden, Dakota Ridge could go either way, as well as Pondo. So that's kind of where the question marks are. I think bare minimum, this team wins 5 games. I think that they're too talented to lose any more than 5. But really, I think that on their upper limit here, they could win as many as 8 games, honestly. So I'm going to say a window of wins of 5 to 8. But I think that personally, I just have to see what Jameson is capable of, which is good that down the stretch is where they play in that league. And he's going to get tested early on. Hopefully, the confidence doesn't get too rattled or anything like that. But I'm probably feeling a 7-3 season from Heritage this year. And we're switching it up here, heading to the Denver area here to talk about Denver North. Last season, I was spot on projecting the Vikings to go 6-4 behind an electric offense and an opportunistic defense. And they did just that, falling smack dab in the window of win middle here of 5-7. But they are losing some serious talent to the class of 24 here. The big loss here, Frankie Dardano, who is maximized in Coach Orta's offense here. Shout out my guy Victor over there, and that scheme that has helped develop so many quarterbacks at this, just in his short coaching career here, post-graduation of UNCO. But anyways, Dardano's impact here helped this squad average 29 points per game behind his 226 yards per game through the air and his team-leading 433 yards on the ground to maximize his value and scoring opportunities to the tune of 37 touchdowns and may have been a catalyst in their jump to 4A this season. There's also 2 to 4 leading rushers on this team that combined for over 850 yards and 6 total touchdowns in Eli Espinoza, Michael Van, and Isaac Romero, who all graduate. Big tight end target Jack Gordon was dominant in 3A last year, recording 55 receptions for over half of all receiving touchdowns and nearly 800 yards. And there's another position here in the receiving categories that's been ravished by graduation with Lorenzo Guerrera and Gabe McGinnis, both graduating on almost 1,000 yards and 9 scores. And then that's followed up with receiving options 4 through 9. Only 2 players who caught at least one pass are coming back here. And Scotty Drulard was one name you did not hear mentioned on the other side of the ball because he's too busy wreaking havoc to the tune of 103 tackles defensively. Players that are coming back include the likes of Quincy Donald and Brian Rangel, who are looking to make an impact in the trenches on both sides of the ball. Both these guys had over 50 tackles apiece. And Blake Drouillard here, hope I'm saying that right, it seems like Scotty's younger brother here, was only a freshman who had close to 20 tackles. But this is a team in major overhaul here, and I think that is going to end up showing here once they start getting the ball rolling on this season. But, they got a competent coaching staff over there that maximized the talent last season. So looking ahead to this year's schedule, they open up against Centaurus. Centaurus is graduating a lot here, just as Denver North is, and they play at home. But I think that Centaurus has just a few more big-time playmakers that are coming back. Adams City is just a tough program that seems in constant disarray, so this is a game they could win. Versus Grand Junction, this is a game that they probably lose. I think that Grand Junction's top-end talent is just a little bit better, so I am going to favor Denver North. At North Glen is an interesting game. I think that North Glen does win that one, however. They then are facing off against Littleton High School, who just low-key lost probably their best player here and is always having a hard time getting guys to come out there, but I think it is a winnable game for either squad. They then play George Washington. I don't love this matchup for Denver North this season, as well as Thomas Jefferson. I like this matchup a lot more than if they played last year, but there's still going to be just a few more impact guys on Thomas Jefferson this season compared to the likes of Denver North here. They then play Northfield. Once again, not in love with this. They had a hard time with them last season, and so I don't see that really getting better. Montbello, I feel, while they did play a JV schedule last season, I'll talk a little bit about that. They have just a few more athletes that I have a little bit more faith in. And then Aurora Central here. This is a game that Denver North could win, but could kind of go either way. So Denver North probably in for a little bit of a longer season here. I think on the high end of things, they could win 3, 4, 5. They could win 5 games, but I am projecting them to win 2, maybe 3. So I'm going to say a window of wins of 2 to 5 here following a historic season that they had last year and a historic class of 24 here. And I say that they go 3-7 overall on the season. Now on to G-Dub here. They took a little bit of a step back last year, as a little bit of it was a transition year. This team lost games to playoff teams and beat bad teams, sometimes in dramatic fashion. I mean, to start the season, they mollywopped Hinckley to start before losing to Falcon by 2 scores. They then got back-to-back wins over Kennedy and Aurora Central before losing 2 in a row to Far Northeast and Meade. They then bounced back with a crazy 1-point win over Niwot before losing their last 3 contests and narrowly missing the playoffs at 4-6. Now, some of the guys who graduate who were important were the likes of Jared Runnels. He was the premier offensive playmaker with 94 touches between running the football and catching it and picking up over 700 yards and 10 touchdowns. Another receiving threat who departs is Tongal Ngalami, that's how you're probably supposed to say that. 433 yards on 34 receptions and 3 scores. You also lose the top 6 tacklers on this team, who all graduate with the likes of Reeds, 80 tackles at the top, and then defensive stud Fred Scott notching 76, and a handful of the backfield, including 8 sacks, as well as Runnell in Ngalami's name, who both pop up in this section as well. Runnell with 2 interceptions to go with 3 pass breakups, as well as being one of the leading tacklers on this team. Now, some of the playmakers who come back, you got to love that they're returning their quarterback, Hayes Dwyer here, who is great under center, throwing for 1,736 yards and 18 scores to just 4 picks, while rushing for another 4 scores and 385 yards. You also return a couple of guys who were banged up last year, who hopefully get some health going their way and play a full season, like Halen Fleming, who almost ran for 400 yards in 6 games, and David Yahi, who was a contributor a few years ago, honestly, and he only had 350 yards, but it was in 3 games. So if they could just stay healthy, this could be a pretty balanced attack on offense here. And you also get Fleming, who was the leading non-senior in tackles. Didn't quite get to 35, but still was an impact guy. And then Tuadros, who caught for over 300 yards and will pick up a lot of slack catching the ball, and he was also tied for the team lead in interception. So overall, I kind of like what G-Dub's got going here. They got a couple guys returning to the line as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at this schedule that starts off, with a doozy here at home versus Falcon. They're then at home versus Harrison before going on the road to Evergreen and then playing Conifer and Glenwood Springs here. So really interestingly enough, playing a handful of 3A teams here to start the season. I think that over the course of this stretch, they should pick up 2 wins, and they might be able to pick up a 3rd over the course of this non-league play. And then once they're in league, I feel a lot better about their chances this year. I think that they're probably favored to beat Denver North. They're probably favored to beat Aurora Central, right? So even on the low end of things, that puts them at their win total from last year. And I think they're in a way better spot to compete against Thomas Jefferson and potentially win, to compete against Montbello and potentially win. Northfield is, spoiler alert, probably my favorite to win this league this season, but we'll talk about them here in just a little bit here. But I think that George Washington, at worst, matches their win total from last year, winning 4 games, but at best could definitely have a wide window of wins here, as if they 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Honestly, they could win. I'm going to bump up their floor here to 5 and say that they can win anywhere from 5. No. Yeah, 5 to 8 games, honestly. If they get their ducks in a row, I am more so projecting them to go 6-4, I will say. I kind of like what they're bringing back. I like Hayes Dwyer. I like these running backs here, and I think that this offense could really make some noise and just be very balanced and hard to beat, and make sure that this defense is well rested so that way they could go at full speed every single snap. Keeping it in this league here, we're going to talk about Aurora Central, where after getting punched in the mouth to start their season by Northfield out the gate, they did get a win over Hinckley, and that would kind of be an indication of how this season was going to go, as they beat Adams City Big and Thornton, where they eked out a 15-12 win over Thornton here. So that was kind of the caliber of teams for their wins, and they'd lose against Falcon, Rangeview, G-Dub, Broomfield, Fruita Monument, as well as Heritage. That was just kind of the story of the Trojans season here. And I mean, it didn't help that they were playing in a league that I think was just punching up just a little bit, honestly. But, looking at their window of wins, I said that they would go between 2 and 4, and they did exactly that, going 3 and 7 on the season here. As far as graduated seniors go, these stats seemed a little sus, but talking about Christopher Perkins, he was the premier player who felt like he was dragging this team to some of these wins and just being competitive. He ran for 911 yards and 8 scores, while also leading the team in total tackles and interceptions at 4, just doing whatever this team needed. And then that you also lose Andre Harris as a big-time senior who had 53 tackles. Returning playmakers here, Kamari May ran for 300-plus yards and 2 touchdowns while adding on a team-high 127 yards and 13 receptions. You also bring back Felix Morales here, who had 66 total tackles. Ladarius Willingham led the team with 2 sacks as a freshman, and then Nicholas Quintero had an interception his freshman season, as did Ladarius and Avante Hosley, who looks like he might have had a pick 6. So this team had some pretty young contributors last year, and they weren't exactly making waves in the wins that they were getting necessarily. So I think that there's still lots of room for growth and improvement, but I think that this is a team that has a lot of young contributors and could, make some noise potentially. Not this year, but probably next year. Looking at their schedule, though, it is a lot more manageable this season than it was last season. They start off non-league play at Adams City versus Highlands Ranch, at Gateway versus Greeley Central, at Hinckley. I think in these games they could realistically go 4-1, honestly. I don't know if they beat Highlands Ranch. And then I think that it's probably more likely that they go 2-3 or 3-2, losing to the likes of Greeley Central, Highlands Ranch, and maybe Adams City out of those other squads. But should be a good start here for this team going 3-2. And then they get into league here. I don't necessarily think they're the cream of the crop when it comes to their league play, as they do have Montbello. They could win this game because they do have, that varsity experience a little bit more for some more guys here. But Montbello, talent-wise, is definitely up there, and I like the staff that they have over there. George Washington, I think that G-Dub should win that game. Thomas Jefferson, they could make interesting, but I still don't favor them. Northfield, Denver North, they could beat Denver North potentially, but I probably have both of those north side squads favored in those games. So honestly, I think that on the very, very bad side of things, they could only win 2 games. But I think that the bottom of their window of wins should be 3 games, honestly, with them winning as many as potentially 5. So let's go ahead and set just an overall window of wins of 2 and 5, and I have this team overall going 4 and 6 this year, doing themselves 1 better than they did last year. And now we have one of the biggest X factors / question marks of this upcoming season, which is Montbello here, who will be sporting a varsity squad here. Last year, they played a JV season to gear up and get ready for this season. So a lot of this is based off of JV film here. But they are going to test themselves early and often coming up this season. So let's talk about some of the guys that they have coming who are going to try and make impacts here. We have the likes of a couple of freshman tailbacks who made noise on JV last year, one of them being Aaron Nelson, who might be seeing some more touches as a sophomore. We also have Deion Turner, who's going to be an incoming senior on this team who looks to make an athletic impact on both sides of the ball at safety and wideout, maybe even corner. Marcus Johnson and Quentin Buggs are 2 more athletes here, with Marcus poised to make some plays on the defensive side of the ball and both being special enough to make plays on offense. In the trenches, JP Roper will be one of the starters on the line coming into his senior year at 6'1", 250 pounds. And then Azael Delgado here will be joining Roper in a senior effort of leading this team in the trenches. So let's take a look at the schedule. First game they have at home versus Vista Ridge. I am going to have Vista Ridge favored in that game as they just return a ton of starters. Then they have versus Evergreen. This game could kind of go either way. I might be leaning Evergreen this early in the season, but if it was any later, it definitely would favor Montbello, in my opinion. They then have at Windsor. I think that this is a loss. Windsor is just really big up front and athletic at important positions. And then they have Frederick here. Frederick is another very good squad here, but this defense could force the offense to make some mistakes, honestly. But it's just the question marks of not really seeing those varsity level snaps. And then at Denver East, this is a game that East should definitely win. So, I mean, at best, they steal 2 of these games, but at worst, they go 0-5 here. Before getting into league play, like I said, I have them favored over Aurora Central. Northfield will be a good time to make a statement here on potentially how well this team could go. I do have Northfield just favored a little bit here, but Montbello could win this game. Versus George Washington, I have G-Dub favored in this game, but once again, Montbello could play spoiler before I do think that Montbello does beat Denver North, and probably not Thomas Jefferson. But they could. This window of wins is going to be big, and that's pretty common, I'd say, for first-year programs. I mean, they could win as few as... I think that their lower limit here is still 3, honestly, so just a little bit. I just see their floor being a little bit higher than Aurora Central, and I really like their ceiling, too, honestly. I think that on the high end of things, this team does win like 6 games. Overall, I probably have them at that 4-6 overall record. Maybe even leaning a little bit more towards 3-7, honestly, just because this non-league schedule is brutal. So that is Montbello High School. Shout out to Montbello community for getting this school together, getting this team together. Shout out to the AD for the work he's put in. Shout out to Coach Stan. That's my guy over there, making sure that these guys get a chance to ball out and show what they're really made of and what they're capable of. Now, this next team was a pretty interesting case study last year. Thomas Jefferson here. I was way off on the original window of wins as they smashed through expectations with a tough and opportunistic defense, climbing to a 9-1 record. This started off with a win over 5A, at the time Pomona, 19-6, and they would continue winning, not allowing 2 scores to happen until their win over Vista Peak Prep, beating Greeley West, Bear Creek, and Stanley Lake along the way. They would then earn their first close win over Far Northeast before absolutely rocking Liberty. They lose their first game of the season past this halfway point on the road to Ponderosa before bouncing back and finishing with a win over Denver South. The Spartans in the playoffs would double down on their improvements from last season, beating Stanley Lake in the playoffs, this time by a score of 22-14, before losing to Dakota Ridge 52-28. What made this team so special? Well, as alluded to, it was that defense. Shout out to Coach Milburn, my old coach, who really knows how to get the most out of his linebackers and just defense in general. And this defense only allowed 16.9 points per game, but that includes an outlier of 52 from a very explosive Dakota Ridge offense. So I think that should be considered here, and it was a very senior-heavy effort. I'm looking at the likes of Braden Larimer, leading tackler with 138 combined solo and assisted tackles, including 18 of those coming in the backfield. You have Jake, Tapia, and Scobie here, who flew around the field making plays to the tune of 179 total tackles and 22 total TFLs, with Tapia pacing them at 15. Not to mention his effort rushing the quarterback, getting 5 sacks, and then being a turnover machine, intercepting 3 passes, causing 2 fumbles, and recovering one himself. Scobie might have not been getting home on the rush as often, but still notched a couple of sacks and probably even some more mistakes forced upon the quarterback as he had double-digit hurries. They also bring back Doran Saha here, who is amongst the leaders in the passing defense with 3 INTs and over 100 return yards, showing he could do something with it after making the play in the first place. The previously mentioned Larimer also had a team-high 3 fumble recoveries and was tied for the team most in 2 forced fumbles as a part of this squad's 32 total turnovers. You also have the likes of Ramos, Haralambopoulos, Tupper Brown, and Allen, who are all players who made plays intercepting the football. And through, the Spartans senior class loses 21 of 32 total turnovers that walk across the stage. Ramos also being special in the pass defense, being second on the squad in pass deflections at 21. Up front, you also lose Keyshawn Caesar, who may have recovered a fumble, but his real claim to fame was constantly being in the QB's face with 15 hurries and 8 sacks to go with 10 TFLs. Fellow big fella up front, Travion Johnson, was third in total tackles and tied for third in TFLs with Caesar with 10. While Haralambopoulos made plays on the defensive side of the ball, his dynamic playmaking was essential on offense, having over 2,900 total yards passing and rushing and a total of 30 touchdowns, most of that damage being on the ground with over 100 yards in 9 games. Tapia was the complimentary back here with 1,227 yards and 15 scores of his own, not to mention Larimer, who had 1,007 scores. And then leading the way, catching the ball for the senior class was Scobie here and Saha. Both these receivers combined for 1,077 yards and 11 touchdowns. That's a lot of talent to lose. Why do I still give Thomas Jefferson a chance? Well, let's go ahead and listen to not only my praise for this coaching staff, but for some of the returning playmakers. I'm looking at watch list guy Luke Keller here, who is probably one of the better returners here in the entire state, with him having notched the best receiving line of any of the returners at 9, 2, 5, and 3 touchdowns. But it's defensively where his impact makes, where he had crazy category leads in interceptions and pass deflections with 4 and 30, respectively, being one of the top guys coming back in the 4A classifications, dare I say. The only guy who finished ahead of Keller in tackles was Jaleed Coleman, as far as returners go in the tackling department, notching 43 total. You also have an interesting sophomore returning back to the frame in Kai Rogers, 6'3", 180 pounds. Got some snaps, but with a little bit more size, could make some more noise defensively as maybe an edge, and his vertical and athleticism could maybe make him a target on offense. They also benefit from transfer quarterback Nick Ratty here, who could be the guy tasked with winning games and getting the ball to playmakers fast and in space, which is something well within his capabilities. We'll just have to see how his supporting cast looks come this fall. So let's take a look at Thomas Jefferson's schedule for this season and see how this revamped squad will do. Now, to start here, they do play Niwot initially. I think that this could be a win, even though it is on the road. Then they play Mountain Range. I think that Mountain Range is just returning a little bit more consistency, so they'll have a little bit more chemistry. It's a winnable game, but I am favoring Mountain Range. I'm also going to favor Golden. At Highlands Ranch, this is going to be a very interesting game, and one that I think Thomas Jefferson steals on the road, but I don't guarantee it. Then they play Longmont. I think that this is probably a loss, so I think that they are 2-3 heading into league play. Before facing off against Northfield, I have Northfield favored. But then Denver North, Aurora Central, I have TJ favored in those games. Against George Washington, this is going to be very interesting. This game could go either way. It should be a very high-impact game with a lot at stake. So we will see, like I said, either way on that game, and then Montbello to close the season. So I think that this team is capable of winning bare minimum 3 games and on the high end 6 games, just depending on what they get out of their other skill position players here. But I'm going to project them to probably go 5-5, just kind of middle of the road season here. And they'll probably be a little bit better here in 2 years. Last but not least here, we have the Northfield Nighthawks, who made their way up to 3A and found success pretty quickly these past 2 years after being in 2A just a couple of years ago here. They started off with some big wins against some solid programs. Aurora Central, they won with a 50-burger. Then they beat 2 playoff teams in Riverdale Ridge and Denver North here by a combined 32 points. So some close games there. A close one against Denver North, only winning that one by 8 before clobbering Adams City. They then lose to Vista Ridge in overtime, 30-27, which I think was probably their hint that they could compete in a higher classification. Kennedy, they won 62-12 before dropping their last 2 regular season games against Holy Family and Lutheran, both those teams making state, so nothing really to be ashamed of there, before beating Fort Morgan Lincoln here to end their season at a 7-3 record here before beating Pueblo Central on the road by 20 points. There was some things that I do not condone here. Please keep your hands to yourself on that note. And then they would play Thompson Valley on the road and lose that by just a single score against one of the higher seeds in 3A. I think that there's a lot to be happy about here if you are Northfield here. And some of those things to not be as happy about is some of the talent that you will be losing to the senior class here. Obviously, leading receiver Cameron Joyce Fairley headlines this receiving class that loses their top 4 receivers here. You have the likes of Dean Stickle here, as well as Jalen Robinson and Marcus Lamar Wiley. These guys all together lose close to 800 yards as well as 13 touchdowns. Cameron Joyce Fairley leading the pack in that regard with 6 of those. You also lose leading passer and rusher Christian Love here. Christian Love went for over 1,700 total yards last season and 29 total touchdowns, throwing 13 of those to just 3 interceptions here. You do, on the defensive side of the ball, also lose a couple of dogs here. Jack Easterly being the main one, that linebacker who had 71 total tackles. And then of the top 6 players in tackles, you are graduating 5 of them. And of the top 10 tacklers, you are graduating 8 of them. So this defense is going to look pretty different next year as far as total tackles goes, as well as guys in the backfield. I'm looking at an Evan Roberts here. I'm looking at a Connor Reese here. And then defensively, Cameron Joyce Fairley also had 4 interceptions, which was above and beyond the lead here for this squad. So why am I still confident heading into next season? Well, defensively, they are losing a lot of tacklers, but they keep a lot of good high-end talent. I'm looking at edge rusher Dylan Anderson here. Absolute game record, 10.5 total TFLs here, 61 total tackles, being second on the team. I'm looking at only a sophomore in Elion Olivia here, who had 30 total tackles last season and will continue to make an impact. And then as far as the secondary goes, this secondary and pass defense was very impressive from a younger class standpoint here. Antoine Collins, as a sophomore, had 3 interceptions. Oliva here with 3 himself. Then you also bring back Brandon Sullivan. You bring back Cameron Harris, a freshman here, and Micah Sheehan, who made an interception. Sam Pazewski here. This team was just very, very good at defending the pass, along with an edge rusher that's coming back. I think that's a great form of success to win a lot of these games defensively. And then they also bring back, offensively, sophomore tailback Xavier Cheneth here, who notched 500 yards on just 70 carries here and 5 scores. He will be leaned on a little bit more as this team is looking for a QB here, but they have some decent guys in the wings that I've seen kind of get snaps. I'm looking at a Hugo Minor potentially here, who is a dog and, somebody who could really make a difference here for this Nighthawk squad and maybe even be an upgrade throwing the football, but Christian Love's athleticism is going to be pretty hard to overlook. But moving along here, let's go ahead and look towards next season and what that schedule looks like here. Now, obviously, we know what their league kind of looks like. This is their first year in 4A. They start off with their first game being a home game against Roosevelt. I do think that they lose that before losing on the road to Mesa Ridge, losing on the road to Heritage. I think that they probably also they do have Pueblo East at home, so I'm going to favor them a little bit in that game. And then Denver South at Denver South. This is a game that they could win. I'm not going to lie, this is a game that they could steal against Denver South. I like what they're returning defensively. Denver South, I still should think be favored, but don't be surprised if they pull off an upset here before facing Thomas Jefferson, Montbello, Denver North, Aurora Central, and George Washington. That George Washington game is probably going to be for the league. That's probably going to be for the league title here. I think that they definitely beat Denver North and Aurora Central with the defense that they're returning. Now, against Thomas Jefferson, Northfield's offense might not convert as well, but Thomas Jefferson, I feel like that could be a game that ends like literally 14-10 or 18-11, just something silly, kind of a low-scoring game in that one. But I think this Northfield team is kind of built to win those games. And then George Washington, this one will be for league, and I think that it could go either way here. So looking at their out-of-league schedule, at best they win 2 games, but they probably go like 1-4 before coming into league, and probably going 4-1 or 5-0. So I think that this team has a window of wins as low as 3, but as high as 7. That's a pretty big window of wins, but this is a team that is new to 4A, which I think is important to factor in. And overall, I think that they could eke out a 5-5 season up at Northfield. That'll do it for this edition of Playmakers Corner and these season previews here, going through the 4A Metro 2 League, I want to say a little bit, and then a couple of other dogs from another 4A league, and then the 4A Denver kind of league here. So thank you so much for listening. Be sure to listen to other season previews that I've done in the past, or Coach V, and stay tuned for more season previews anywhere that you listen to podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Breaker, and Spotify. So be sure to listen to us on all those. We also post to YouTube, so go ahead and find us on there, as well as some other social media platforms here: TikTok, Instagram, both at Playmakers Corner on there, Facebook, Playmakers Corner, 2 separate words, and X/Twitter at Playmaker Corner. Go ahead and follow us on all of those for all new announcements. Turn on notifications so that way you get notified when we release new content on any of our platforms. I have been your host, Cody Stauffer, for this episode, signing off.